Hi everyone. So today we're going to talk about one of the most important aspects of business communication, and really any writing situation, and that is the audience. Um, so really, when we think about audience and communication, what we're thinking about is perspective. Can we walk in another person's shoes? Can we figure out what other people experience, and can we understand that to such an extent that we can reach that experience and we can share meaning with that person? Audience begins with a good concept of self. What that means is you want to really dig down into what your attitudes, beliefs, and values are. Um, Attitudes are the learned predispositions to a concept or object. Beliefs are the convictions or expressions of confidence that you have. And values are ideals that guide your behavior. So, looking at these three things to begin with can help you understand what your biases are going to be when you approach an audience. What are my blind spots? They're going to be based on my attitudes, beliefs, and values. And this is really connected, I think, to Cooley's idea of the looking glass self. And this is a really important thing to think about, just I think in general, but especially when we're talking about communication, when we're talking about understanding who an audience is and also who ourselves are. And that is the idea that a self is constructed by a set of mirrors. And it's the mirrors that are reflecting back our communities, our religious beliefs, the things that are around us essentially are what actually reflect back on us and create us. So a person, when we think about who a person is and their perspective, that perspective is almost exclusively based on what exists around them, their own context, their own value systems and culture systems. So these, concepts, they reflect back on us, obviously, but they're also ways for us to think about other people. And so a good question for us to ask as we begin thinking about our audience is, what are the preconceptions, pre-understandings, and conventions that surround specific things that our audience is interacting with? So a really good example of this, I study digital technologies. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see Saved by the Bell, a specific technology. There's a specific use of this technology, and it's a specific context and time in which this technology existed. So a person who perhaps understood mobile technologies beginning in this era is going to have a completely different understanding of their body, for example, how the hand is held, what buttons are pressed, and how the actual object feels in their hands, versus the person who may be more familiar with the technology that's on the right. I will never forget the moment when a teacher of mine asked all of us, and of course many of us were, we had our phones in our hand, we weren't paying much attention in class, asked all of us to describe immediately where our hands were placed. And immediately all of us understood that our pinkies were on the bottom of the cell phone. Our three fingers were holding the cell phone on the side, and our thumb was doing this scrolling action that you see here. Every single one of us. These are our preconceptions about how this technology works, what it's for, and it shapes how we interact with that. It shapes how we interact with that, and therefore shapes how the maker of this technology communicates with us, how this technology is marketed to us, and so on and so forth. So these are things that we want to think about as far as what a person's experience, how it affects how they interact with certain ideas or products or anything else. So really, we have beginning understanding about perception and awareness. This helps us understand selection, which is what people pay attention to. What people pay attention to is what's important to them. Very, very simple. People pay attention to what's important to them. So when we're communicating, either marketing or public relations or any kind of business communication, even internal, how do we capture that idea of selection where people pay attention to what's important to them? So we can kind of account for selection based on certain stimuli. So there's when people are when people receive stimuli, there are internal and external stimuli. The internal is from within oneself. So this is, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm sleepy. And so some kind of marketing campaign can capitalize on that, can say, okay, I'm going to run certain ads at certain times of day, because I know that I'm going to catch someone. I'm going to be able to simulate a certain internal response from someone based on that context. An external stimulation or stimuli is from what outside of a person. So, if someone shows me a cute puppy, I'm going to pay attention to that cute puppy because I love cute puppies. If I have a need right now to complete, an article or a piece of homework, that's going to be the thing that I pay attention to. So once we have selection, we also have selection that's based on exposure, attention, and retention. Exposure, selective exposure, is the stimuli we do or we don't pay attention to. Is or isn't available to us. So we are exposed to a certain stimuli, and that's what we pay attention to. There's selective attention. So this is when we're focusing on one stimuli and stimulus, and ignoring everything else because our attention has been captured by this one. Selective retention is when we choose to remember something over another thing. And all of these, exposure, attention, and retention, they can affect each other. So we can be exposed for a long time to a certain thing and not pay attention to it anymore. We selectively attend to the thing that's new, right? We can choose to remember one stimulus over another because we have been exposed to it over and over again. This is how studying works, right? You read, you study problem sets, you understand a certain concept over and over and over again, and you retain it because you've memorized it, or that's the idea behind it anyways. So when we communicate in a business context, we can organize things based on this process of selection. We can understand how people pay attention to certain things, how people are exposed to certain things, and how people remember certain things. We can take the time to understand our audiences, how they differ from us, and how they do that process of selecting, sorting, retaining, and paying attention to information. When we do that, we can lead them directly to our desired space of meaning. So I offer this Mad Men GIF here to see the world laid out in front of you the way other people live it. This is kind of the whole point of business communication, is to anticipate what people think and what people want and to put it in front of them. And that's not just in a marketing concept. That's also in an internal business communication. That's in, reporting on a budget. Understanding what people want, what people will see, and putting it in front of them so that they see it. So again, I like to do things somewhat theoretically at times. There is this concept of organization of information and communication that's called the Gestalt principle of organization. And Gestalt means a unified whole. It's everything all in one. And so what this means theoretically is that context matters. It means that the whole is going to be greater than just the sum of its parts, and that we perceive and we seek a holistic view of the world. We seek balance and understanding and holistic unification of things. What it means practically, we can use design principles of communication, things like proximity, continuity, similarity, uniformity, contrast, symmetry, and closure, to indicate specific relationships. So this is not just a visual design principle, this is also structuring arguments, structuring written documents, understanding that the whole is what we need to kind of highlight, and so organizing a document so that it does that. So we've talked about what it means when everything happens the way you want it to, when you understand your audience completely and you're perfectly right. But what happens when we don't understand our audience, when we are not able to walk in their shoes and we don't see them eye to eye? Well, perception is based on our experiences. So there are things that we need to understand about our audience that in some ways are almost impossible for us to understand. For example, we cannot, as able-bodied people, understand what disabled people feel in their bodies. We don't have that experience. We don't know what it is. We don't live that on a day-to-day basis. So we can't exactly understand it. We can't understand cultural differences. We have trouble understanding psychological differences in the same way that we have trouble understanding physiological differences, even to the point of like understanding pain. Communicating pain is one of the most problematic parts of the medical profession because pain scales don't accurately represent what pain actually is for different people. And then also just kind of regular old preferences. And these can be based on any of the other three perceptive experiences, but preferences are, a very clear way that we can misunderstand our audience. So we got to get to know them. We have to understand that of the knowledge there is on an audience, we have a very small amount of it that's readily available, and there's a whole iceberg under the water that isn't readily available. So we have to do a lot of thought work to really get to know our audience. So questions that we might want to ask ourselves: how big is the audience? What are their backgrounds, genders, races, ages, jobs, education levels, interests, etc.? What's their familiarity with your topic? So if you're, communicating a technical concept to the sales team, what is the sales team's familiarity with specific, technologies? May not be a lot, so you have to account for that. What other resources or materials are available to your audience? What do they cover? So you don't want to waste time. You want to be able to attend to the new stimuli as opposed to go over the things that your audience has already been exposed to. And of course, how much space do you have to do this? Also related, how much time do you have to do this? So understand your audience. Do this by being an active perceiver. Ask people questions. I mean, as creepy as this sounds, watch people, like understand them, research them in many different ways, and be an active perceiver of their experience. Recognize that each person has a unique frame of reference, that even though they may be a part of a culture, they have a unique experience of that culture. And so we can't always make generalizations, but sometimes we have to. Recognize that people, objects, and situations change. Understand how perceptions play a role in communication reception. We've been talking about that a lot. So understand how people can perceive different things. Keep an open mind about your audience and always check your perceptions. Again, people change. Each person is unique. So always be kind of in check with that. And as always, we're going to be talking about this a lot throughout the semester, but you have to be an ethical business communicator. You have to be fair to your audience. You want to make sure that you're being reciprocal, that you're being mutual, non-judgmental. You're being honest with them, but you're also being respectful of them. I want to end it there, and I want to thank you for listening. As always, if you guys have any questions about this aspect of our work, it is an incredibly important one, so I am very much here for questions. All right, thanks.